Okay, all right. We're going to sit down. We're going to knock this out. Ready? Hi, everyone. Sammy Flair here. Welcome back to Bolt Action, the series where if I was a generic NHL YouTube channel, I would be so excited to talk to you about the upcoming games in Stockholm, Sweden in a couple of weeks. But because I am a Tampa Bay Lightning fan, it's much more likely that today we're going to talk about the fact that my team is giving me Stockholm Syndrome. And I feel like that's relatable for every sports fan in the world, right? Regardless of what team you cheer for in whatever sport, or if you like individual sports like tennis and golf, like what individual athlete you happen to cheer for, you can't expect a championship every single year. That's not realistic. You can't expect to be good every single season. That's not how the world works. The old saying goes that you can't win them all, and boy, did the Lightning take that one quite literally this week. But there comes a point in time where you have to recognize that your team is not where it once was. It may not be in championship form at the moment. They may be going through rebuilding. They may be going through difficulties, but your good times, at least in the meantime, they're kind of over. And while I am not ready to hit the panic button just yet, and I'm not ready to throw in the towel, because let's remember, Andrei Vasilevskiy is due to come back sooner than later. The last report I heard said he was supposed to come back sometime around Thanksgiving, and I'm just crossing my fingers hoping that that timeline is on the early side of Thanksgiving. Through the first 10 games of this season, I feel like I have a pretty good grasp on what this team is, at least for right now. And let me just go ahead and say this right now, let it hang over this video and the rest of this season. Andrei Vasilevskiy is not going to fix all of your problems. Oh, but Sammy, you love Andrei Vasilevskiy. That's right, I do. I think he is the best goalie in the league, and he has been for quite some time. I think he is already a shoo-in for the Hall of Fame, and if he continues on the pace that he has been playing, there's no reason he shouldn't be at least on the fringes of the discussion of the greatest goalie of all time. But let me demonstrate my point to you right now. Pick any goalie you want. Someone from the league right now. Take Connor Hellebuyck, Ilya Sorokin, Igor Shesterkin. Pick somebody from history. Pick an all-time great goalie. Who do you want? Do you want Dominik Hasek? Sure, let's throw him in goal. Do you want Martin Brodeur? Do you want Patrick Waugh? Do you want George Vezina himself? Throw any of them in goal and tell me, how many more wins through the first 10 games do the Lightning have right now? 1? Maybe 2? Maybe that's the Buffalo game. Maybe that's the Toronto game. Maybe it's the Seattle game. You know what the key is in all 3 of those games that we only lost by 1 goal? Lost them all in overtime. And spoiler alert, we're going to talk about overtime here in just a minute. But I'm already getting so worked up. I forgot to mention the 2 games that the Lightning played this week. If you hadn't already guessed, they lost both of them, starting with a 4-3 loss to the Seattle Kraken in overtime on home ice before starting a road trip in Columbus and losing 4-2 to the Blue Jackets. And as I sit here and think about what I actually want to talk about in regards to those 2 games, I'm kind of coming up blank here, because it's everything that I've already talked about in the first 2 weeks of this series. The Lightning are 4-3-3 through the first 10 games of this season. They have 11 points in the standings, and while that's not bad, I'm actually kind of thankful for that, because on an ideal pace, you should be aiming for roughly 12 points every 10 games of the season. That puts you on pace for 96 points through the season, and with very few exceptions, 96 points gets you into the playoffs most of the time. But the fact of the matter is that 4-3-3 is a little bit misleading, because you can easily just look at that and say, oh, look, they've won 4 games and they only lost 3 in overtime. They're practically 5. No, they are 4-6 right now. They have lost 6 of their first 10 games. And with the exception of the shutouts against Carolina and San Jose, the other 8 games that the Lightning have played so far have followed a very specific formula. And if I can't think of anything new to say about it, it's because it's the exact same thing, and I've already said it so many times in the first 2 weeks. The Lightning don't play 60 minutes. And you can apply that same formula to the other 2 wins that the Lightning have had, and oh my gosh, it's 10 games in. Lightning have only won 4 games. 2 of them have been shutouts, but they've only won 4 games. What the hell? The Nashville game, for instance, opening game of the season, it's at home. Emotions are running high, and I understand you're not going to be as buttoned up as you want to be. You haven't played hockey in a few months after all, so it's a little more understandable that they have a down period. but the Predators do all the scoring in the second period. Thankfully, Tampa comes away with a win. The very next week, at home again against Vancouver, Tampa just decides they can't be bothered to play for 20 minutes in the middle of the game. And thankfully, Tampa won that game too. But the problem is the precedent that they are setting through the first 10 games of the season, or shall I say, through 80% of the first 10 games of the season. If you're losing games because you have an off night or you have a backup goaltender in net, I understand that. It's an 82-game season. You actually can't win all of the games. Nobody has ever done it in history. Nobody is going to do it in the future. I understand off nights are going to happen. But when your effort level, when your output from half of your wins looks exactly the same as they do from all of your losses, that's a bad look. And instead of me hitting you with a whole bunch of statistics to illustrate my point, let's go straight to the head coach, Jon Cooper, and his comments from post-game interviews after these two losses to Seattle and Columbus. After the loss to Seattle, Cooper said, quote, "Game was lost in the first period." He goes on to say, in reference to Jonas Johansson, the fact that they scored 3 goals, that was completely the guys in front of him. Does that sound familiar to anyone? Is there anyone you could think of that maybe has been making a series about the Tampa Bay Lightning and has been saying that exact same thing for the last, 2 weeks or so? Or how about this quote from Coop after the loss to the Blue Jackets? "Gotta play the complete game, and we are not doing that. Clearly didn't play the third one tonight. If you're not going to do that on the road, you have no chance of winning." I don't envy Jon Cooper's position as an NHL coach. I don't envy any professional coach's position because they are given such an incredibly difficult task in managing a team. You can be the most brilliant mind in your sport. You can draw up the perfect game plan for every single game. And at the end of the day, if your players don't execute, yeah, it sucks and they're probably going to get shipped off, but their play is ultimately a reflection on you. For anyone who has ever experienced the life of a coach, and I actually have, I used to be a tennis coach for a little while, but even still, if you have been in a management position in your profession, meaning you have managed people underneath you, no matter what size your team is, you know you cannot make people care about their work. You can't make them perform any better. They have to make that choice and they have to perform. They have to do it on their own. And when expectations aren't being met, guess who's on the hook for that? It's the leader. Almost every time, the person in the lead position is the one that is held responsible. So I sympathize with Jon Cooper. He's seeing all the same things that I am seeing as a fan, and he is tasked with righting the ship. How the hell do you go about that? I honestly have no idea. That is way out of my league. I feel like many fans and many critics of the Lightning would be willing to give them more of a pass right now if the problem was truly and only the goaltending situation. But it's not. I've talked about Jonas Johansson before, and I know Matt Tompkins, it's his first season. He's played 2 games in his NHL career. They both come in the last 2 weeks. At this point, I'm convinced that Jonas Johansson can handle the responsibility of being the starting goaltender for this team. What he is not getting and why some of his numbers are less than desirable is because the team isn't playing in front of him like they should. But the fact of the matter is that at this point in the season, Jonas Johansson is the reason that you are in some of these games. There have been multiple games so far where he has been on the wrong side of a 2-on-0. He's stopped all of them somehow. I'm thoroughly impressed by that, but he should never be in that position. Actually, I take that back. I remember one of them being Johansson and then another one being Matt Tompkins, but still, the point stands. And look, after those quotes, I could basically call the video over, right? He's saying the exact same thing that I'm saying. I have nothing new to add to this conversation at this point in time. As I said earlier, in the NHL, there's kind of this rule of thumb or this goal that you can aim for during the season. And I remember it first being talked about by Dave Mishkin, who's the radio announcer for the Tampa Bay Lightning. And it's basically, you're aiming to get 12 points in the standings for every 10 games that you play. And that puts you on pace for 96 points throughout the season. And most of the time that's going to get you into the playoffs. Now, the easiest way to do that is, of course, win 6 games out of every 10 games that you play. But, depending on how you're playing, maybe a few overtime losses get mixed in there. And so you win 5 games and you lose 2 in overtime. But as long as you're averaging out those 12 points every 10 games, you're in pretty good shape. The Lightning fell 1 point short of that in the first stretch of 10 games from this season. They got 11 instead of 12. Hopefully they're going to make it up further on down the road. And kind of the saving grace of that right now is that with the exception of Boston, nobody in the Atlantic is really exceeding expectations right now. Again, outside of Boston, every team in the Atlantic has between 8 and 13 points at this point during the season. But as we're looking ahead, there are 2 very important and very concerning things to think about as the Lightning enter that next segment of 10 games. First of all, the Lightning have not won any of their 3 overtime games from this season. They lost to the Buffalo Sabres, to the Toronto Maple Leafs, and the Seattle Kraken all in overtime. And the concerning thing is not that they lost each of these games. I mean, that sucks, but it's not the most concerning thing. The most concerning thing is actually kind of twofold here. Number one, in those 3 overtime periods, the Lightning have not registered a single shot on goal. They are being outshot 12-0 in overtime. Number 2, in overtime, the Lightning have not won a face-off. Obviously, not having a shot on goal, that really sucks, but not even winning a single face-off, not being able to control any sort of possession so that you can at least attempt to generate some offense, that's got to change. But the other thing, the most concerning thing, in my opinion, as we're going into this next segment of 10 games, the Lightning have not won a single game on the road so far. They have played 4 games on the road, and were it not for the fact that Brandon Hagel tied up the game late in Buffalo, they would be a solid 0-4. But thankfully, they went to overtime, so they're only 0-3-1. These next 10 games, half of them are going to be on the road. The 10 games after that, which should take us through to the point where Vasilevsky should be ready to come back, 7 of them are on the road. Those 5 road games in the next 10-game segment, you have a pretty good chance at winning most of them. You have Ottawa, you have Toronto and Montreal. Granted, you're on a back-to-back there, so you're probably okay if you lose one of those. You have St. Louis and you have Chicago. There's no reason that you can't win most of those games. But it's the 7 road games after that, in the next 10-game segment, where I start to get concerned as I look down the schedule, because you have to go to Carolina, you have to do a back-to-back against Colorado and Arizona, you have to go to Dallas, you have to go to Nashville on the second half of a back-to-back because you're playing Pittsburgh at home the night before, you have to go to Seattle, Vancouver, Edmonton, and Calgary. Look, at home, they're doing fine. They've played 6 games at home. They've gotten 10 points in those 6 games. But that's not going to make up for the fact of having a winless record on the road. The old saying goes that you can't win a Stanley Cup in October, and of course you can't win it in November or December, but you can definitely lose it in those months. And since we're on the topic of looking ahead, let me preview the 4 games we'll be talking about in next week's video. The Lightning have 3 more games in this road trip, starting with a Saturday matchup against the Ottawa Senators. They have Sunday off before doing a back-to-back in Toronto and Montreal. Then they come home for a quick 2-game homestand that starts with the Chicago Blackhawks. And since I want to end these videos on a somewhat positive note, which is very difficult to do this week, let me make a quick mention that the Tampa Bay Lightning have released their schedule for their themed nights for this season. Now, even though the league has passed down some pretty strict policies regarding what teams can and cannot do on these themed nights, we've already seen that players are willing to take a stand. In fact, the Pride tape ban already got reversed because of the actions of one player. That's all it took was one player for the league to fold. But apart from mentioning the theme nights because, well, I think they're wonderful initiatives for the Lightning to undertake. I think they're wonderful initiatives for any team to undertake, regardless of sport or location. I think the leagues should be undertaking these initiatives too, but again, it's a conversation for another time. I bring it up because I've also done a little bit of perusing on the Lightning's social media channels just to get a feel for the fan reaction on Facebook and on Twitter and on Instagram to see how people are feeling about these theme nights. And while I am very pleased to report that most of the comments are very supportive and people are on board with them, there are some comments out there that are hilarious and incredibly unhinged. And we're going to look at some of those. I'm going to dedicate probably 20 to 30 minutes of my next Twitch stream. I think that's coming up on Monday night, November 6th. It's just a couple of days from right now when I'm recording it. And we're just going to read some of those together. I will probably re-upload that segment as a highlight reel on this channel, but if you want to see it live, twitch.tv/SammyFlair. I occasionally do nights over there where I can't watch the game like live with you. I can't broadcast the game, but you can kind of get my reaction as we go through it. I'll let you know when the next one of those is coming up as well. That is going to do it for this video. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you for giving me just a little bit of your time. I know I say it every week, but the fact that there's somebody out there that enjoys these videos, it makes my heart happy. So you know who you are. Thank you. But until I see you again, remember, go Bolts, and will someone please tell the team you play to win the game? Just do it for a whole game, please. I'm begging you.